YTBC, what's the deal? So one of the commenters on one of my last videos, Nez998, Nez998, he asked me, he was curious to hear my thoughts on former heavyweight contender David Tua. Tua, man. Man, where do I start with David Tua? Well, let's go back to the beginning, man. Let's go to the 90s. In the 90s era, if I had to rate the 90s as a decade, from 90 to 1999, I would definitely have David Tua somewhere in my top 12. As far as a power puncher, I would probably have him somewhere in my top 5. But just overall, what he accomplished through the 90s, he was 35-1 in that decade. He knocked out John Ruiz, what was it, 19, 20 seconds. He knocked out Hasim Rahman late in that fight, although he was getting outboxed, but he came back and knocked out Rahman. He knocked out Oleg Moskiev late. So his power, man, he had early knockout power, and his power can carry late into fights. Some people argue that knockout to Rahman was after the bell. They thought it was a sucker punch or whatever. I believe that was that first fight. The second fight was a draw that I thought Rahman should have won that fight. But, David Tua, he kind of fought like a hybrid style, kind of like a Marciano Frazier almost combined. He would try to fight out of that crouch a little bit, and if he couldn't find a intelligent way inside, he would lunge a lot, man. He would just lunge and try to lunge with that left hook. He was very susceptible to jabs and being held. I understand, a lot of people are susceptible to Lennox Lewis jab, and I understand that. But even when Rahman was jabbing him, when Chris Bird was jabbing him, whenever you kept a good jab in his face and kept him on the outside, he looked pretty lost, man. And he would just stop coming forward. The Lennox Lewis fight, the first round, he was coming in, trying to bulldoze Lennox. Lennox is a big guy to begin with, especially with that jab right in front of you and that right hand coming behind it. But once, it was like the first round, once he figured, damn, I can't get inside, it mentally looked like he kind of just gave up a little bit, And again, I know it's easier said than done when you're fighting an all-time great like Lennox Lewis. So, I'm not comparing him to an average Joe, I'm saying to other elite heavyweights in that time frame in the 90s. People say, he's supposed to be the second coming of Mike Tyson, and to a degree was the second coming of Mike Tyson. He was the second coming of the 1997 version of Mike Tyson. The Mike Tyson that quit moving his head, that started to lunge in, that plotted around, that didn't try to, he didn't try to move his head when he was being jabbed. So Tua has some of that version of Mike Tyson, but he was nothing like the late 80s Mike Tyson. He didn't have the hand speed, the combinations. He couldn't move on his feet as fast. He didn't bend at the waist as fast and as fluidly as Tyson, in my opinion. But David Tua was a world-class fighter. Like I said, in the 90s, he was a top 12 fighter to me. I would rate Lennox, Holyfield, Bull, Tyson, Foreman, the Bear Buche, Moore, McCall, Holmes, Mercer. I would probably rate them all higher than David Tua in the 90s. Now, it doesn't mean that Tua couldn't have beat those guys. In no way am I saying that if you pitted Tua against any of those guys I named, that he wouldn't have a chance. I'm not saying that, but when I rate the 90s, I have him somewhere maybe 12th, 11th, somewhere right there. It's funny, man, because I did some research, man. I was looking at the average weight for heavyweights in the 70s, and it was 211 pounds. The average weight for heavyweights in the 80s was 220 pounds. The average weight for heavyweights in the 90s was 234 pounds. The average weight for heavyweights from 2000 to 2009 was 234 pounds, the same exact it was for the 90s. And this information is from top rated heavyweights, guys in the top 15. That was the average weight. So it's almost like, damn, man, Tua came about 10 years too late. I would have loved to see him come up in the 80s. You know what I'm saying? I know it's if, coulda, shoulda, but I would have loved to see him compete in the 80s. Not guys from the 80s, but in the era where guys were, the heavyweights were a little smaller. I think that would have suited him a little better. And going into the 2000s with Tua, man, there were some fights that I believe would have made for exciting fights. Even in the 2000s, from about 2000 to 2004, 2005, there's some good fights that could have been made with Tua. I would love to see Tua against a Samuel Peter, or against Holyfield, or against Layman Brewster, or James Toney, or Ray Mercer, or even a Corey Sanders. But any of the tall heavyweights with a good jab, like a Lennox Lewis rematch, would have been bad. Vitaly Klitschko match would have been bad. Even Vladimir. Now, if he would have been able to bum rush Vladimir like Corey Sanders did, although Sanders' attack, would have probably looked a little bit different in front of Vladimir. Vladimir probably would have known what to do a little bit more against Tua than he did against Sanders. But anybody that their objective was to box, they gave Tua trouble. Tua would have had trouble against Larry Donald. He would have had trouble. He just had trouble against guys like that, man. But guys that wanted to come close and engage, 50-50 fight with a guy like David Tua with that left hook and that just his power, especially in close. Now, maybe with the exception of a guy like Henry Akawande, I think Tua would have been able to beat him. But who knows, man? Akawande, he got damn disqualified for holding in the Lennox Lewis fight. You know what I'm saying? Akawande would hold his ass off. But those are some exciting fights that I didn't get to see him fight, even going into the 2000s, man. Like, damn, I would have saw those fights. But he had some impressive knockouts, man. I know he knocked out Wilson on was that HBO fight? He knocked out Wilson in the first round. He had some exciting fights, man. Even though Michael Moore is way past his prime when he fought Moore. I believe that was early 2000s when he fought Moore, maybe 2002. I can't remember. Knocked him out quick. The Ruiz knockout was very impressive, especially looking at it in hindsight. Ruiz is not a guy that gets knocked out like that, or even knocked down. I rarely see John Ruiz hurt in fights. The Roy Jones fight, he wasn't really hurt. The Holyfield fights, he wasn't hurt too bad. David Haye hurt him. But I really didn't see Ruiz hurt throughout his career that much. And for him to get knocked out quick like that by Tua was very impressive. If you didn't know, there's a video on YouTube of David Tua sparring Evander Holyfield in preparation for Holyfield's first fight with Mike Tyson. And looking at that fight, that would have been an exciting fight had they would have fought in the 90s or the 2000s, Tua and Holyfield. But even going into the 2000s, I still would rate, just from what Tua did in the 2000s, I would say he was still a top 15 type of heavyweight fighter. If I rated him his 2000s. But the 90s, I believe his best year was probably 99. I don't know if you remember, but Lennox Lewis and Holyfield were unifying. They had a rematch also, but they were unifying after Holyfield had beat Tyson. And then, Lennox and Holyfield were trying to unify. And Michael Grant, Ike Beabuche, David Tua, Kirk Johnson, they were like the top contenders around then, and we know that Tua and Ike Beabuche had a damn close fight. I thought Beabuche won the fight, but it was a damn close fight. That was a good fight. I would have loved to see Tua versus Michael Grant, Kirk Johnson. Those would have been some interesting heavyweight fights. But yeah, David Tua just never got it done as far as when he got a shot at the heavyweight crown, man. Even his title eliminators. A fight I couldn't believe he lost was the Chris Bird, and Chris Bird is very underrated heavyweight of the 2000s. Very dominant, man. He's a blown up light heavyweight. We know that Beabuche knocked Chris Bird out, but Ike Beabuche was a tough son of a bitch too. He only had 20 fights in his career. We know what happened with him, but well, if you didn't know, he went to prison. But damn, David Tua very durable, man. Never been knocked out. Only got knocked down once by Monte Barrett of all people late in his career. I believe that, what was that, 2010, 2011, way past his prime, David Tua. But his career spanned over 21 years, over 50 fights, never been knocked out. And I'm kind of praying, man, that they don't try to bring David Tua out of retirement to fight Joseph Parker. I've heard no word of it, but David Tua's last fight was in 2013, so I'm just kind of thinking about that. I hope they don't do that, man. I hope they don't do it. But power punch. I mean, David Tua was very exciting to watch, man. You know, I did a video on my old channel. I might put it in the description box, where just one of my dreams matchup from the 90s was Tyson versus Tua. Late 90s Tyson versus Tua. That would have been a good fight, because that's not the 80s versions of Tyson. A lot of people, you know, they tend to forget, man, that the 80s version of Tyson is just a different animal compared to anything after that. I'm not saying Tyson wasn't formidable when he fought Razor Ruddock, and when he, you know, his comeback trail against Alex Stewart and Henry Tillman, guys like that, but or even when he fought Bruno for the second time and Selden and all those guys, you know, it wasn't the same Tyson, and that to me makes it that much more exciting that it wasn't the same Tyson, you know. But David Tua, another thing that I noticed about his career, and it used to upset me, is his I don't want to say his work ethic, but just his training. I mean, his weight was just so up and down, man. Like, I gave you guys the numbers about the 90s and 2000s heavyweight, where the average weight from those decades was 234 pounds. So I don't know if Tua was trying to, you know, be more accustomed to the 90s and the 2000s with his weight, or going into the 2000s with his weight, because he would fluctuate, man. You take the Rockman fight, the first fight against Rockman, he was, what, 224 pounds? When he rematched Rockman, although it went the distance and, you know, he went the full rounds and he got the decision in it, he had gained 20 more pounds. He was like 245 for that fight. Then he'll drop back down to 230, then hop back up to 247. He was just inconsistent with his weight, you know, and I didn't understand it. Just like with a guy like Mike Tyson, just like all those smaller great heavyweights, Frazier, Marciano, Tyson, they were, to me, they were at their best when they were small, when they were around that 218, 220-ish. That's when they were at their best, you know. But 230, 245, no, because now you're slow and you're plodding. You know, Tua was already a little slow of foot, and then to add 20 more pounds on top of it was like, oh man, what are we going to do with this extra weight? Because you look at his damn calves and his thighs. I mean, he generated a lot of power from his legs, like Tyson. You know, a lot of similarities to Mike, but wasn't Mike Tyson, you know. But to answer your question, my thoughts on Tua, man, he was an exciting action fighter. You know, I thought his best year is about 98, 99, somewhere in there. Damn good action fighter. Never could get it quite done when he went against, you know, the Lennox Lewis, when he fought Bird, you know, but or even around the time when he got the draw with Rockman, you know, that could have put him in position to probably get another title shot, you know. But definitely an exciting fighter. I believe, you know, can't remember all this right now top of my head, but whoever was his promoter back then, or was running his career, or was giving him decisions, you know, there's a lot of action fights that they kept him out of, like I said, just in the early 2000s, man. Could you imagine him in, you know, I know Samuel Peter came a little bit later in the decade, but just like a Samuel Peter or Holyfield or Lehman Brewster, James Toney, you know, Mercer, Curry Sanders, they would have stood right in front and banged with him, and that would have been a great fight. But when he got in there with guys that would keep a jab on him, man, and wrap him up, he would get discouraged and he'll just start leaping in, and he would stop throwing shots. Although he had a good chin, he would just be a target. You know, Lennox pretty much had target practice with him. You know, but Tua, definitely exciting fighter, man. If we get another David Tua in the heavyweight division, that'd be a plus, man, you know. But definitely in my top 12 of the 90s, and definitely somewhere in my top 16, 15, somewhere in there of the 2000s. YTBC, I'm out.